Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is my privilege and honor to present these humble remarks in this environment. And which is most amazing for me is the fact that the same audience, was going, at least here, through the presentation, very interesting presentation of networking, internet influencing the policy, ancient laws of citizenship in Greece, and now we are coming to my humble remarks about dialogue of civilization, visions and perspectives dealing with geoeconomy, geopolitics, and the audience is more or less the same. You are unbelievable people, I should admit. Since the foundation of World Public Forum, which happened 16 years ago, and maybe it is strange, but it was established 16 years ago, firstly in India, but the permanent address of the Forum of Dialogue of Civilization was Rhodes. So, when I learned about Delphi Forum, I was of the opinion that it was not just coincidence, that people who invented the idea of Delphi Forum, they were relying on the rich history of ancient Greece and Delphi as a place. Same was applied to the idea of Rhodes Forum, because we were told by my friends, American of Greek origin, Mr. Nicholas Papanikolaou, he told me the myth that in ancient Greece, they were of the opinion that the gravity in Rhodes was less than in the rest of the Greece. So the competition of jumpers was very oftenly organized in Rhodes. It was our superstitious idea that possibly it will help us to introduce our intellectual exercises to raise the consciousness of the people, figuratively speaking, intellectual jumping, and that's why we started in Rhodes. So since the beginning, it was the opinion of Rhodes family, Rhodes participants, that GDP cannot reflect properly the economic and social development of the society, that there are trade-offs between socio-economic and ecological sustainable development goals, for example. So that achieving the socio-economic goals while applying the prevailing non-prudent use of natural resources is simply impossible. At that time, 13 years ago, actually it was accepted with some very serious skepticism by mainstream, specialists. Nowadays, this position is not that revolutionary anymore, and expressed by the most reputable experts. We can name the experts of very well-known Davos Forum, and we can also name the recent report of Rome Club. There are no receipts how to cope with growing inequality, environmental degradation, rising flows of refugees, and geopolitical tensions, and state that even mainstream economists have come to the conclusion that markets do nothing to reduce inequality among people, quite the reverse. End of quotation. Similarly, in the 2018 Davos Forum registered elevated levels of concerns about ecological and geopolitical risks in 2008-2014. Then experts were under the impression of 2008 well-known crisis. You know, somebody even called this Great Recession. And were mostly concerned with the risk of asset price collapse, financial crisis, and major systematic financial failures. But since 2015, the perception of major global risk changed. Now those are environment and geopolitics figures. Rhodes Forum was focusing at these risks from the very start, since 16 years ago. As was started at our first conference in 2003 at Rhodes, quote, "The present globalization fixed on material sphere and conducted in interest of a small group of the Western rich developed countries without any ethical, moral, and value limitations, conducted without consideration for the interests of poor and developing countries, can be detrimental for the future of humanity. The new global world order, forged by the unipolar power structure, is a challenge to the true concept of human dignity and equality, and is an affront to the freedom and sovereignty of nations. The search for that human future must evolve to an alteration of the material world where we live, where our modern civilization exists. Otherwise, humanity will forever continue in a state of rapid drift towards an Armageddon." End of the quotation of one of the first resolutions of the World Public Forum. That is table introduced, I'm sorry, you did not really see what it is, and it is hardly possible to read it. But that is not the very, idea why I am introducing that. I'm just showing you that is the table of the global risks which were considered as the utmost important risk during the latest Davos Forum. You know, if you have the trouble to open the report, you will easily find that, there are actually all the possible risks they calculated. You possibly will not find why on earth, say, the water supply shortage was placed somewhere in 2011. Because, when I visited Jordan in 2008 and was meeting with scholars and politicians there, I learned, for example, that at that time the water supply shortage was already extremely important to this country. Davos experts, they placed it somewhere in 2011. You also will have difficulties to understand why the chronic diseases appear to be very important at the same approximately period of time. Then they were drifting to somewhere 2011 and suddenly disappeared. Would it mean that, our medicine settled all the problem of chronic diseases? You also will find economic challenges, crisis. You will find, inequality, all those things there. They were structured in major 5 groups. You will see economic, environmental, geopolitical, social, and technological. Whether it is true or not, this is for the scientific expert discussion. But there is something common about all these risks, which to my mind, we are neglecting now. Everything we are talking, we are talking about community. We are talking about people. I was thinking how I can bridge ancient, law of citizens with what I am talking, and the only thing I can remind you is that everything new is a well-forgotten history. So we are talking about the risk, and we are not seeing the actual substance of those risks. And the substance, to my mind, is that is actually the risks for humanity. It is not just separate economic risks. It is not just separate technological or geopolitical risks. We are talking about civilization. So this is humanitarian risks. And if we are talking about values, if we are talking about social aspects, what we are talking about? We are talking about humanity. That means we can discuss the term civilizations, but we are talking civilizational crisis. Also, I suppose it is very important to talk about the issue of inequality. It is modern today, fashionable to talk about inequalities in comparison of the inequalities, economic inequalities between different countries, parts or layers of the society, and it is actually very important. Many developing countries, mostly in East Asia, but not only there, are successfully catching up with the developed countries. This is true. People started to live longer. The actual conditions of living became better like never before. Everything true. But, if we have like 3 million of people starving in Africa, can we say about average figures, or we should concentrate on the actual figures for those who are being deprived of the actual success of the development of different civilizations? Here at this slide, you see the change of the marginal taxation. It was drastically dropping during the period in 1920. That is right after the well-known revolution in Russia. It was also drastically dropping right after the World War II, and it is now constantly dropping, but at the same time, the rise of income inequality is also rising. So this continuation of the tendency of rising inequality and deviation inside the societies, they are posing a very serious risk for the development of any society, any country, irrespective. We are talking about Europe, we are talking about particular country, we are talking East, we are talking West, we are talking South, or we are talking North. These worrying tendencies could undermine the prospects for global prosperity and peace, as we consider that. It is first and foremost the increase in income inequalities within major countries. The gap between the rich and poor is growing since the early 80s, and this is particular, I would like to draw attention, even for such country as the USA. In most European countries and in many countries of the global South, same tendency. And it is approaching the historical heights of the beginning of 20th century. And the trend is exactly the opposite of the notion of inclusive development as we all understand it. On this slide, it is a self-talking slide about different approaches and what we consider is essential to note how to cope with these, tendencies. And it is not possible without new architecture of international relations, new rules for globalization, and the new model of human development. When we are talking about development of the society, when we are talking about development of science and technology, when we are talking about growth, it was Simon Kuznets, or Simon Kuznets, American economist, who is author of the GDP and national accounts concept. Even he argued early as in 1934 that the welfare of nations can scarcely be inferred from a measurement of national income. As early as the beginning of 20th century, even Fisher made this distinguish between production, that is macroeconomic management, and welfare perspective. In 1990, UNDP started the publication of Human Development Report, where the Human Development Index was calculated. It was a simple, non-weighted average of 3 normalized indicators: life expectancy, educational level, PPP, GDP per capita. In recent years, HDI is adjusted for inequality. When we judge the countries by this index, we will sure find on the top countries of the North, Baltic countries, of course well-developed countries, but at the same time, which is surprisingly, we will find countries which are not on the top of this list, like Slovenia, for example. And I would like possibly to attract your attention to some quotation of John Kennedy, which was made, in 1968. The short quote is, "The GDP is measuring everything except that which makes life worthwhile." 1968. And only now some experts started to talk about development of the society. Even more, in his speech, he said, "It counts napalm and counts nuclear warheads, the armed cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. It counts Whitman's rifle and Speck's knives, and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children." That is about GDP. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, not our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. I would sign under all these words Mr. Kennedy introduced in 1968. Okay, something happened, doesn't matter. So the reason I am addressing all these issues are very simple. During Delphi Forum, in other forums, we are talking separately about the pieces of the mosaic which is actually the life of the civilizations. We are inviting the best professors to enlighten us on the tendency in economies. We are talking about the new tendency in science and technology. We are talking about everything separately, but we are losing the ability to see the greater picture of the human civilization life. To our humble opinion, we need to change the trend. We need to change the methods. We need to change the model. And if previously it was only Dialogue of Civilization Research Institute who was introducing those ideas, now this is Nobel laureate Stiglitz who is telling this. Now these are the experts of Rome Club who are stating that the existing model expired and some new model, economic and social model, should be introduced. The commission that included 5 Nobel laureates in economics concluded in 2009 that the time is ripe for our measurement system to shift emphasis from measuring economic production to measuring people's well-being. End of the quotation. Today, there is a large literature on shortcoming of GDP and a lot of proposals for alternative indicators of economic and social progress. But the issue is far from settled. In the 21st century, however, we should hope that we could limit the ruinous consequences of economic competition and ensure that less survival and development of the societies and civilizations is not determined by the economic, political, and military might. As our world approaches the third decade of the 21st century, we are planning more hopes and pining more hopes than ever on the idea of dialogue of civilizations that has come to be an intellectual and practical response to theories of a clash of civilization as proposed a quarter of a century ago. New ideas and projects should be evaluated on their merit only, irrespective to the forces that are promoting them. We advocate the world of civilizations equality, inclusive development, cooperation in dealing with utmost dangerous challenges, and that is the task of DOC Research Institute. Okay, it started to work and expired again. I'm sorry. So it is inevitable that paradigm of the dialogue of civilization should be developed and supported by new, as I said, by new model of socioeconomic development. So far, all of us, we know only 2 systems, actually. That is modernized system of capitalism and, may I say, also modernized system of socialism. But both, they are not answering the utmost important challenges. If not moral values, if not the idea of equality, if not the sustainable peace, if not the equality of civilizations, once again, we do not think that any modern researchers providing the new model of development will be sustainable and will bring us from this very shadowed period of time in the history of humanity. When the accumulation of the wealth is no longer of high social importance, there will be great change in the code of morals. Do you know who said that? It was Keynes. In 1930s, he predicted that if not worse, in 100 years, his grandsons and daughters, well, figuratively speaking, will live in this world where the accumulation of wealth will not be a sustainable target for the society, but rather to be considered as a very unpleasant disease where, the doctors should be invited to treat the personality. All kinds of social customs, economic practices affecting the distribution of wealth and of economic rewards and penalties, which we now maintain at all costs, however distasteful and unjust they may be in themselves, because they are tremendously useful in promoting the accumulation of capital, we shall then be free at last for discard. End of his quotation from this article. What will be the economical power of our grandchildren in 100 years? Thank you very much.